Another example, another comparison, quite interesting, between the stereometric chamber and the single chamber, was done in March 1980 in Venice, on the occasion of a relief requested by the municipality of a building overlooking the Grand Canal. And on that occasion, we also made other surveys, like the Basilica of San Marco. Shooting was done with our Wild C120 stereometric camera and the Wild P31 single chamber, made available by Wild Italia, with the operator, who was responsible for it. Here we see the stereometric chamber, behind me, mounted on a floating platform. There were big doubts about shooting from the floating platform, because it wasn't horizontal. But apart from the fact that it was the only way to survey this building, you could not think of a scaffold or something that would allow you to take the measurements, nor much less think of a topographic survey, which is always by points. With the stereometric camera, we made several shots. Because, if you notice, when a boat passed, especially of a certain size, the wave was created, but it was enough to stop at that moment and wait for the water to calm down. We were in a lagoon, not in the middle of the ocean. They took several shots, but I must say that almost all the shots were good. Because, even when the camera is swinging, one is ready to take the picture when the bubble is centered. Remember that all the operations to be done with the stereometric chamber are plate loading, shutter loading, diaphragm adjustment, exposure time adjustment, according to the data provided by the exposure meter. There is nothing else to do. Setup is fairly quick. While as regards the single chamber, the shot was taken from a building that stood in front of the building concerned, placing the two stations on two balconies. Note that, in the case of the P31 single chamber, there is a normal theodolite, with a base, on which the metric chamber was placed. In the P30 there was the advantage of placing the instrument with the optical axis orthogonal to the chamber, and aiming the aim. The orthogonality at the base was assured. In the case of P31, due to the fixed parallelism of the chamber and theodolite, it was necessary to aim first and then rotate the entire instrumentation by 90 degrees. Obviously they are choices dependent on the operator, who has to decide what to do, and how best to do it. However, it remains that in the case of theodolite, with the rotation of 90 degrees the operator may make some mistakes. Because, for the rotation of 90 degrees, it must hold the support of the metric chamber. The metric chamber support operates in jerks, and you are sure of the rotation of the chosen angle, which is not the case with theodolite. I say that if there is an error in the click rotation, it is a systematic error, therefore known. But someone who claims that the theodolite allows rotation with greater precision, it's about points of view. As for the single camera shooting method, you put the camera on an easel, aims on the other stand, you take the shot. Then you change your position. On the other screen, maybe you didn't notice, there is the relief of the Basilica of San Marco, with the single chamber. Obviously the stereometric chamber was offside, because, to resume the whole building, it was necessary to move more than 24 meters away, which is the maximum capacity of the double chamber, even if an excessive basis for recovery was adopted. Remember that the shooting base is between 1/5 and 1/20 of the shooting distance. goes from 1/5, maximum precision. But bad stereoscopic vision, as if we were observing an object 25 centimeters away. At 1/20, with excellent stereoscopic vision, but less precision. If we allow ourselves the luxury of falling below 1/5, that is 1/4, 1/2, the precision increases. But as far as stereoscopic vision is concerned, it is like observing an object placed at 10 centimeters. At most it is observed with the monocle, but no one approaches an object at 10 centimeters. To observe it better is likely to transmit two faces of the object to the brain. Two mismatched images. The first satellite shots were with a basic distance ratio of 1:1. But it was a question of pointing out points. No one thought of stereoscopic vision at all. We also see other shots made. Very interesting experience, because browsing through the various channels with the boat, even if they didn't shoot, we were aware of the difficulties existing in the historic centers. With narrow streets, so without the possibility of using a wide angle, and having to make a series of angled defenses. In Venice, it seems to me that the municipality has only used a scale print. In fact, the facade of the building is quite flat. In reality, at the time there was no thought of having the stereoscopic model to measure at home. There was no internet. The only instrument suitable for restitution was the analog restitutor that we saw in the trolley project, and which we'll talk more about later. And therefore it was forced, playfully, to accept the graphic restitution. The classic design, so scale printing was already an advanced solution, and gave more details, for the purpose of planning any intervention. There was still no thought of relief as a building project. We'll talk about it later, but today it is unthinkable to provide the relief of a prospect without realizing what is behind that facade, especially with the use of modeling programs. It is ridiculous to return only the prospect and that's it. With interactive images, with so many facts that took over, anyone needs to know, with a click, what's behind it, know how it is furnished. So have a match between inside and outside. Correspondence that, between us, has always been in architecture. The first sections, rather than the structure, represented the relationship between the external environment and the internal environment. I speak of the sections elaborated at the beginning by the architectural representation. Here is the Scala del Bavolo. They had put a plumb line to check the verticality of the tower. In this case it was important to set up the instrument. But for the purpose of the survey, since there was a plumb line, even if the inclination was altered, based on it we would have rotated the model. all the slabs of the reliefs made in Venice. Following Vandal raids when the laboratory was located in the monumental complex of Santa Scholastica, the slabs of Venice have disappeared or been destroyed. Only the prints remain on the internet, which could be used for a rough return, but the seriousness of the vandalism remains.